Have you ever stayed at a resort in Toronto? Probably not. There aren't really any. But 60 years ago, there were quite a few. Hotels with pools, ballrooms with live music, where people could take a holiday without ever leaving town. The biggest of them sat on a hill at Leslie and Eglinton, wrapped in 600 acres of parkland. But in the winter of 1981, 6 people died there in a single night. Today, there's nothing left of it. This is the story of the Inn on the Park. To understand Inn on the Park, we have to go back to the 1950s. The end of the Second World War brought a boom to North America. Soldiers came home, married and started families, and the birth rate climbed for the next 20 years. Immigration followed, much of it from Europe. Toronto was fuller every year, and the old city had nowhere to put the people arriving. The answer were the surrounding townships. But to make this strategy viable, people needed to be able to access them first, and the way to do that were cars. The province was already building the infrastructure. Work on the Toronto Bypass, the stretch of Highway 401 that runs across the top of the city, began in January 1951, and provincial officials were explicit about why. They feared Toronto would fall behind other cities if it did not build highways. At the same time, cars became available to ordinary families. Civilian car production that had been shut down for the war had restarted, allowing more people to own. And for the first time, a household could live somewhere with no streetcar line and no station and still get to work. By the mid-1950s, some of the pieces were already in place, and suburbs sprawled quickly. But the growth was not properly controlled. Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke were approving houses on land with no water mains, no sewers, and no tax base to build. And they didn't have enough funds either. To counter that, the province made a strategic move. On January 1st, 1954, the City of Toronto and 12 surrounding municipalities were federated into Metropolitan Toronto, a second tier responsible for the things no township could fund alone. Its purpose was to build the infrastructure that would let the suburbs keep expanding. Its first chair was Frederick Gardner, and in his eyes, Metro should prioritize building highways. The first was the Lakeshore Expressway along the waterfront, which opened in sections from 1958 and was renamed for Gardner himself. The second was a highway through the Don Valley, named the Don Valley Parkway. It opened in stages beginning in August 1961. Development followed the roads, with factories and offices moving out to service land near the interchanges. And the people who came to do business with them, who arrived by car, had a major inconvenience. There were very few places to stay. Most of Toronto's hotels were downtown, built for an era when visitors came by train. The solution was brought from across the border, inspired in a model popular in the United States, the motor hotel. These hotels took the road access and free parking of a roadside motel and added the services of a downtown hotel. Most had a tower, so guests could reach their rooms by elevator instead of walking the length of a single-story building. They offered pools, restaurants, lounges, live music, and banquet halls, in architecture designed to be seen from a moving car. Canadian developers moved on that gap all at once. By the end of 1962, roughly $8 million of new accommodation had been built across Metro, another $8 million was under construction, and up to $20 million more set in proposed projects. More than 1,000 new rooms opened across the region between 1962 and 1963. And to attract customers, some locations began offering unique services or themed experiences. The Canadiana at Kennedy Road and the 401 offered guests a free helicopter ride to the airport. It lasted about 2 months. The Constellation went up on Dixon Road near the airport, with a lounge themed around horse racing. The Valhalla on Highway 27 in Etobicoke went north. A Danish chef, deer in the courtyard, a bar shaped like a Viking longship, and a basement lounge with windows into the swimming pool, where women in fishtail costumes swam past the glass. The Inn on the Park was part of that wave. Isadore Sharp and his partners had opened their first hotel, the Four Seasons Motor Hotel on Jarvis Street, in March 1961. It was a success, and they went looking for a second site. They found 16 acres of scrubland at Leslie and Eglinton, on high ground above the west branch of the Don, surrounded by parkland. There was not much on that corner, but there was a great deal around it. IBM had built its head office and factory at Don Mills Road in Eglinton in 1951 and doubled it 3 years later. The Don Mills community sat just north, with an industrial district of its own. Eglinton Avenue was being extended east through the area, and Flemington Park was being planned to the south. The cherry on top was the Don Valley Parkway, running up the valley near the property. The area had employers, an arterial road, and an expressway arriving. Sharp and his partners decided to buy it, and what they described building on it was a resort within the city. Every other hotel in the boom had to manufacture its resort: the Deer, the Mermaids, the Racing Lounge. The inn had 600 acres of ravine around it. To design it, Sharp went back to Peter Dickinson, whose firm had done the Jarvis Street Hotel. Dickinson worked on the sketches while hospitalized before passing away from cancer, drawing a complex built on 30 and 60-degree angles, shaped so that it could be expanded later. What came out of those sketches was a 6-story section flanked by 2 2-story wings, with pools, gardens, a courtyard, and a heliport. Ground was broken in January 1962, and the $4 million hotel opened little over a year later, on May 2, 1963. The hotel had been built around a specific customer, businessmen, and the amenities showed it. The on-site health club, the Fitness Institute, was run by fitness coach Lloyd Percival. Its model client was understood to be a man in his mid-40s who was overweight, smoked heavily, drank at lunch, and almost never exercised. For guests who had no interest in any of that, the hotel handed out walking maps and rented bicycles. Then the first summer arrived, and the guests who filled it were not the ones the building was designed for. They were Torontonians. The Globe and Mail reported that the hotel gave city people with no cottage and no golf club a country setting inside the city, and that management planned to hold on to them through the winter by flooding a courtyard into a skating rink and running services for skiers using the Don Valley. The resort within a city was working as a resort. It was just working on different people. In May 1964, the hotel opened the Café Discotheque, one of Canada's first discos, and brought in the New York dance instructor Killer Joe Pirro to teach guests the latest moves. The Toronto Musicians Association launched a boycott of Four Seasons over DJs replacing live bands. The dispute ran until November 1965, when Four Seasons agreed to ban DJs from its properties. By then, the company was already thinking of closing the room, because dancers drank less than expected. The club was replaced with a dinner club, the Café de l'Auberge. The hotel's own promotional booklet from around 1966 sold friendliness as the product, an atmosphere the guests would encounter throughout, self-sustaining in either the Copper Lounge or the Terrace Lounge. It also carried a subtitle that describes what the inn was turning into, Toronto's magnificent convention hotel. Success prompted expansion, and the building had been designed to allow it. The first expansion opened in late 1965 and added 200 rooms in a 1,000-seat convention center. The second changed the complex entirely. By the end of the 1960s, Four Seasons was no longer solely a Toronto company with 2 hotels. Its first overseas property opened in 1970, and it was developing a location on Queen Street that would become the Sheraton Centre. The corporate strategy had shifted towards large hotels and international expansion, and the inn was rebuilt to match. In 1971, a 23-story tower opened on the site, with 269 rooms, 30,000 square feet of convention space, a restaurant, and a lounge. Among the early guests in the tower was the Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin, whose visit in October 1971 brought large protests near the property. The tower was a commercial success. The hotel now had the room count and the meeting space to hold major conventions, and the company had the property it needed at the scale it was operating. But the success wouldn't last for much longer. At 2:16 a.m. on January 17, 1981, a fire alarm went off at the inn on the park. The night manager on duty, following the hotel policy, ran to the boiler room at the base of the 23-story tower and turned it off. This was standard practice. The alarms were often false, and guests who were woken up by one could request a refund on their room. After silencing the alarm, the manager saw smoke coming from the tower room restaurant at the base of the tower. He went back to the boiler room to switch the alarms on again. The alarm had gone off because a fire had started in an electrical closet at the base of the tower, most likely from a cigarette butt in a bag of a vacuum cleaner stored there. The tower's 2 interior stairwells and 3 elevator shafts acted as chimneys, funneling smoke and heat upwards through 23 floors. The calls to guests that followed were contradictory. Some were told to evacuate to the lobby, and those who couldn't find exits were told to stay in their rooms. But some guests had already gone into the stairwells. One was safe, and guests went down with minor issues. The other filled with smoke. 6 people died, 4 in that stairwell, all of carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide poisoning. An investigation followed. The coroner's inquest jury deliberated for 2 full days and returned 34 recommendations. The Ontario Fire Code should be enacted immediately, with provisions for upgrading buildings. All hotels should be equipped with sprinklers. Fire alarms should never be turned off. Hotel staff should receive fire safety training, and the Ontario Fire Marshal's office should take over all fire safety inspections across the province. That last recommendation settled something that had contributed to the deaths. Inspections of hotel fire safety in Ontario had been the responsibility of the Liquor License Board. The inn had been inspected. The jury found it had been given a false sense of security by those visits. The ventilation system had not shut off when the fire activated it. 18 fire alarm bells had not functioned properly, and others were inaudible. The jury also considered a contributing factor the delay in search and rescue due to the building's layout, and how the firefighters' radio handsets were inefficient inside the tower. What happened to the hotel after that is harder to establish than it should be. There's no single moment where the inn on the park stopped working. There's only the fact that 24 years later it closed. By the 1980s, the company that built it had become something else. Four Seasons was operating internationally, and the inn on the park was no longer the kind of property it was building or the kind of guests it was chasing. Across Metro Toronto, the rest of the 1962 and 63 resorts cohort was going the same way, mainly due to changing vacations and leisure habits, the continued strength of downtown Toronto as a business and tourism destination, rise in property values, and the expense of maintaining the buildings. In the mid-1990s, Four Seasons began separating the hotel from its land. The surrounding area went first, to a developer who put up 2 condominium buildings. Then, in January 1996, Four Seasons Hotel sold the 570-room hotel itself to Zul Sumani, a Vancouver hotel magnate. The inn on the park name came off the building. It became a Holiday Inn, and later, the Toronto Don Valley Hotel. For the last 3 years it was open, it made no money. Finally, in 2005, Sumani sold the property to Roundtree Enterprises. Roundtree applied to demolish it and build car dealerships on the site. At the same time, the inn on the park was listed on the city's inventory of heritage properties. Listing is not protection. It means a property had been identified as having cultural heritage value without a designation by law behind it, a watch list, requiring an owner to notify council before demolishing, so that the city has time to decide whether to designate. Designation is the status with legal force, and in 2005, the province had strengthened it. Until that year, designating a building only let a municipality delay demolition by 180 days, and owners routinely waited out the clock. After the amendments, a refused demolition permit could no longer be overridden by simply waiting. In April 2006, after discussions with Roundtree about what the replacement building would look like, city staff did not oppose the demolition permit. The Toronto Preservation Board scheduled a deputation before North York Community Council for May 9, 2006, asking that the building be designated as a tribute to Peter Dickinson's work and to the 1960s era Toronto architecture. But there was one problem. Demolition had already begun a day earlier, on May 8th. Robert Saunders, the board's chairman, was told what had happened the morning he was due to present. "It's already disappeared," he said. He added that part of the problem was that modern architecture gets treated as though it cannot have cultural heritage value because it's not 100 years old. Catherine Nasmith of the Architecture Conservancy of Ontario said the city had the power and did not use it, that the local councillors did not care, and that it was an act of vandalism. She also asked how anyone pays homage to an architect by destroying his work. On the other hand, Councillor Cliff Jenkins said the dealership would bring 300 jobs to the site, at a time when the city was worried about losing industrial land to condominiums, and that building it in a way that honored the architectural points of the old building protected its integrity. Roundtree had agreed with the City Heritage Department to rebuild elements of the original, the triangular projections on the front, the courtyard, and the ballroom. Christopher Hume, writing in the Star the next morning, noted the one part of the complex the new plan did retain: the tower. Nothing protected the tower. Roundtree simply had different use in mind for it, a conversion to a senior's residence. That plan fell through, however. Demolition began in September 2014 and finished in the spring of 2015. Today, at Leslie and Eglinton, there are 2 car dealerships and 3 condominium towers. The towers are called auberges on the park. Auberge is French for inn, probably chosen in reference to the hotel and its famous dinner club. The ravine is still there, 600 acres of it, the same parkland that made Sharp believe he could build a resort inside a city. But the inn is long gone. The rest of the 1962 and 63 boom is gone too. The Valhalla was demolished and a condominium now occupies the land. The Constellation is a parking area near the airport. The Canadiana's guest wing survives inside a larger hotel in Scarborough. What those hotels had in common was a profitable surprise: the people living in Toronto that wanted to take a holiday without leaving it. That surprise held for about 15 years. Downtown Toronto, which every one of these hotels had been built to bet against, turned out to be where the businesses and the tourists stayed. Toronto still builds hotels, but today they are built only for people arriving from somewhere else. If you like this type of content and would like to learn more about the environment that surrounds us, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to this channel. Stay tuned for more!